welcome to this weekend's Who Universe review. As we're going to take a look at this week's story, Dot and Bubble. What can I say about Dot and Bubble? I mean, this story, the story was very. I believe the story was great, but the ending was was probably one of those unexpected endings you probably wouldn't expect. It's almost like saying there's always a twist at the end. Like it's common, this whole twist at the end seems to be becoming more and more apparent in Doctor Who this season, and it doesn't ring more true than this story that we're about to discuss because it literally had a twist in the end. Am I even kidding? So, without further ado, let's begin with the discussions of Dot and Bubble. For those of you who have seen the story, we basically opened up this week's story with obviously Linda, who obviously is played by the guest star for the episodes. Obviously, Linda being the character, we obviously wake up to her using the basically sort of telling us how this, showing us how this dots and bubble thing works. So essentially, you have like a little dot device that you say dot on and then bubble over shield, and it basically the bubble is essentially in the interface where how you communicate with your friends. And essentially, she has her own friends list where she communicates with her friends. But gradually, it became apparent that one of her friends had been suspicious about people disappearing, was Linda was just basically ignoring everyone who, ignoring one of her friends who kept saying like something's not right, something's missing, like people are missing, and she was just pretending that nothing's wrong. Obviously, at first, she basically was listening to Ricky September, or Ricky September, as the essentially listening to his him dancing to a 1990 hit, Incy Wincy Emerald and Bikini. I know I probably butchered the song a little bit, but yeah, you get the gist of the song. If you know the song, and you heard it in the episode, you're probably are familiar with the song if you were probably born around if you were around the 1990 era of music, then you'll probably know that song. But anyway, enough said. Obviously, the Doctor tries to convince her, like, look, there's danger. She tries to block him through the messaging methods, but then he was able to obviously unblock himself, as we find out later in the story. But gradually throughout the day, she would basically head to work. Obviously, someone has died by the slug behind her. She was walking to work, clearly showing that death's all around her, and she doesn't realize it. And then of course she was like, my. And then of course she contacts Ruby. Ruby Sunday pretends to be someone else to communicate with her to find out what the hell's going on. And then Linda was like, oh, my friend is just near me and doing that. We're meant to be doing work together. And then Ruby's like, are you really doing work? Is he really literally in the same room as you? And then as she finds out her friends are not there, she asks Ruby, what's going on? Why is my friends not in the workbenches like they should be? And then all of a sudden, Ruby tries to tell her, like, look, I need you to take the bubble down to take a look at what the creature is next to you, because their friend, one of their friends was suspicious about the noise background, and then obviously this is where we see the slug creature basically eating someone alive, perhaps someone who's died already and is being eaten by the slug creature, who's just essentially eating people alive pretty much. And she was very terrified when she saw that. And then of course Ruby and the Doctor tries to say, look, we want you to get out of your workplace and just get the heck out of there because you don't want to be near that thing. But of course we noticed that at first when she took the bubble down, she was struggling to walk. So it seems as though the people with the bubbles seem to have better walking capabilities when they have the bubble, but then of course that becomes sort of later apparent that there are some people who are able to walk without the bubble. So she was one of those people who needs the bubble for directions in terms of walking. So gradually she obviously goes outside, and then the Doctor and Ruby are trying to obviously at first she came very close to being eaten by the slug through the elevator, but luckily the Doctor and Ruby try to get her away from that slug as much as possible. But then she tries to call the police. The police were not really responding. They're not really activated right now. So she's basically relying on the Doctor and Ruby to just basically get her out of the situation. So she contacts her friends and tries to show her friends that, look, some of our friends are not communicating. And then eventually one of her friends brought up like, oh yeah, I mentioned about this earlier. and then all of a sudden the slug is right behind him and eats him alive, and it turns him offline. And of course, she didn't understand why that was until later on we find out from the doctor that it turns out the slug creatures were actually eating people in alphabetical order. So yeah, based on the alphabet is how they, so essentially they were going from A, B, etc., like basically through the alphabet until it eventually reaches Linda's name, pretty much. Of course, at first, Ruby and the Doctor mentions about the tunnel, that they had to get to Plaza 55 to get there, and obviously she ran out of battery in a bubble, so she was basically on her own until she came across Ricky's Thompson, or Ricky's, the Ricky character ends up guiding her with his voice, because she was struggling to keep away from the slug creatures. And luckily, the fact that she was very pleased to meet her idol because she followed the guy, and then it almost felt like she had a sort of a love interest to him. But that sort of closed off very quickly, because as we learn from this scene, that gradually, when they're able to get to the place where they need to access the code, obviously she was able to recharge the bubble at this point. She basically she is able to activate the code into the point that obviously her dot was basically turning against her, because it basically corrupted by the slugs. The slugs were able to control this dot from some form of method, and essentially because of this, it eventually led to a situation where we all thought she was going to bring Ricky with her. What finally happened is that she stabbed him in the back by essentially telling the droid that his name comes before hers, she basically sacrificed that man's life just so she could escape. She was more worried about her safety rather than saving another life at the same time. Like, the fact that she went to extreme to save her own skin by not saving Ricky, that shows you right there that there was something not quite right. The fact that she was that terrified, she is willing to put herself more important than anyone else. That's an interesting concept right there. The fact that you have this character who you thought she was willing to help anyone that she meet, turns out that was all a lie. It turns out that she was only interested in her friend and protecting the friends that she knows and the friends that she cares about, rather than anyone who tries to save. Pretty interesting. But anyway, of course, when we finally see her go through the tunnel and finally get to where she needs to be, she finally encounters some of her friends in real life, and she's able to hug them, of course. And then, of course, the Doctor and Ruby finally talked to her about Ricky, and she said she tries to lie and tell them, oh, he went out there to just save everybody else, when that was a lie. She basically let him die, and she basically lied to the Doctor's face, and the Doctor doesn't even realize that's what she did. And she was just sort of playing this idea that, oh, he was out there saving people, when really he wasn't. He was trying to escape at the same time her, but then she basically chose to use him as bait so that she could basically get away. Essentially is what she did. Then of course we come to the shocking ending part that everyone's talking about, or at least a lot of people who have seen the story are talking about. The fact that we see this moment where the Doctor and Ruby, the Doctor basically offers her and her friend the chance to go into space with his TARDIS. He was willing to take her off the planet to keep her safe, right? Not only did she turn him down, the fact that she rejected the offer turned him down because her and her friend believe basically he's a joke. He's a nobody. He's an impossible person. He can't help us. Why would he? He's not even on our friends list. He's not like us. And essentially just sort of hating on him. It's kind of how you could describe it. It's pretty much described as like, yeah, they were hating on him, even though he was basically simply just offering them a chance to get away from all the problems. And yet their solution to the problem is essentially, we're not going to get your help because, sure, you may have saved my life. We don't care about you. Why should we? You're just a time traveler who, you're just this strange man who happens to show up, knows what's going on, and then doesn't do anything about it, essentially, in their eyes. And you can imagine that the frustration in the Doctor's eyes, the fact that the Doctor tried to laugh it off, but then he got angrier as he tried to laugh it off, and you could see it in his emotion Ruby obviously tried to make sure that he was okay. There was even a point in that scene where we see the Doctor crying. Barely see that from the Doctor, and we only see that in rare occasions. The fact that we see it here really does show that how emotionally destroyed he was in that moment, how vulnerable he was in that state, and the fact that you had Lynn looking at him in disgust, like look at him like he murdered her cat or something. And the fact that she was looking at him in that way really does show how very spiteful she was towards the end, the character, and it really, it just shows that even she even had many of the audience fooled into thinking that she was this good person when really she wasn't. She was essentially using the Doctor just to get away, but to also meet to her friends, so that as long as she has her friends, she's okay now. Essentially is how this story seems to play out, and the fact that she sacrificed her own sort of man crush to save her own life really just shows the how basically desperate she was to get out. Pretty much is essentially she was using her desperation tactics just to get herself out of that situation, which is really that just really sums it up. Really, it sums up the character and how she behaved pretty much towards the Doctor. And you can tell the Doctor wasn't happy about any of this. Of course, he wasn't really happy about the fact that she rejected his offer. But luckily though, the Doctor and Ruby are still traveling, so at least the Doctor and Ruby, the Doctor's got Ruby to look after him, so at least that's something. But you could tell that he was not happy about her turning him down. He was doing everything he could to get her out of that planet so she didn't have to be scared again. But instead, she listened to her friends more than the Doctor, which really just sums up her friends seem to be more important than having her life saved and taken out against, to be stepped away from the slug, which is insane. But there you go. That's pretty much the moral of the story, this whole point of the story. And it definitely sort of goes in line with what Russell was saying about, or Ncuti Gatwa was saying about, this story is going to bring up a conversation that would be talked about after the episode's aired, and I definitely agree. There seems to be this sort of theme, singling people out seems to be apparent in the final moments. How Ncuti Gatwa's 15th Doctor was essentially singled out because of how different he is compared to them. You could tell that was a message clearly sent to what happens in the real world. That sort of atmosphere is kind of what basically happens in the real world in many occasions, and it definitely brings a really like a real life topic into your mind after you see that moment, because you almost kind of relates to what we see in the real world these days, and in fact what we see in the news very often is stuff like this, and it does sort of send that message across, and hopefully this is going to put more eyes in terms of how to tackle it, especially considering we've got the election coming up. Maybe they will finally have a reason to solve this problem. But anyway, I don't really want to get into the politics stuff because I'm not really a politics person. But anyway, that's pretty much the moral of the story of Dr. Bobble. Pretty much the Linda character was essentially not as all as she seems, as we saw throughout the story. She might have been sweet at start. It turns out she has a dark side, was waiting to come out pretty much. And another thing to scream and another thing to point out is that we find out character's mother happens to be played by Susan Twist. And guess what? The Doctor and Ruby instantly recognize that face, and even the Doctor brings up the fact that this was the face of the ambulance, which we saw in Boom. And then Ruby said, hang on, I met that place somewhere before, because last week she met her as the hiker trying to deal with the 73-year-old woman who scared her off. So yeah, very interesting. Very, very, very interesting how the Doctor and Ruby are starting to take notice that face keeps popping up a lot, and she's going to be popping up again as the portrait in the Bridgerton story Road that we're going to be seeing next week. So I definitely believe we're going to start seeing a lot of things starting to connect when it comes to Susan Twist, hopefully. As we enter next week, hopefully we'll start learning more as to why she does this. Why is she following the Doctor everywhere she goes? Like, what is the purpose of that? Hopefully we will find out. Anyway, with that said, in terms of the trailer for Rogue, well, that Jonathan Groff character, who's playing the character called Rogue, that's the name of his character. I'm sorry to say this, but that character is looking more and more like Captain Jack every time I see those clips of him holding the gun at the Doctor that looks almost identical to the one that Captain Jack had when John Barrowman was playing the character. And the fact that his shirt is very identical to the blue jacket that Captain Jack wore in the modern day. Yeah, I call that pretty much. I bet to call that is the new Captain Jack of the new run of Doctor Who. The fact that he looks very similar to Captain Jack in some aspects, you would be a fool to make me believe that is not Captain Jack. This guy is bound to be the new Captain Jack. I can't imagine this guy not being Captain Jack after basically wearing clothing that's almost similar to Captain Jack. The fact that he's wearing blue, that's similar to the blue jacket that Captain Jack wore, and the fact that he's wearing he's got the gun that's basically the same gun as what Captain Jack had. It definitely screams Captain Jack. It definitely screams that this Roger is some form of a time agent that's basically at the same level as Captain Jack. I'm willing to bet this is the new Captain Jack of the new era of Doctor Who. It just screams it, especially when you see that scene of him holding the gun at the Doctor. It basically screams this is Captain Jack. And also the synopsis says the Doctor's life is going to be changed forever. This has to be Captain Jack. There's no way that you can change the Doctor's life unless Roger ends up being referred to as Captain Jack. That would change the Doctor's life, guaranteed. Anyway, as well as that, we also have another scene that I have to call out. Is this weird scene where Ruby is holding hands with a man, or he definitely looks like a man, that has a sort of corrupted face that just looks so terrifying. Nobody in the room is looking scared when they see this. Like, trust me, you would be suspicious if you saw a face that looks very horrifying, like it's almost like a butterfly or some kind of a corrupted butterfly who is walking with Ruby and he's holding hands with her. That's got to be some sort of a suspicion, right? Like, how on earth does Ruby suddenly mix with someone doesn't look right? Like, that's some kind of coincidence, isn't it? The fact that she's, holding hands with someone who's basically corrupted. The humans don't seem to be bothered the people in that room don't seem to be bothered by the fact that he's showing his true colors. Like, what is going on in this building? Like, there's seriously something that seems off to me that you wouldn't be afraid when you see a face like that. There's something a bit off about the people in the actual dance hall in this trailer that don't seem to react to unusual activity that's in that room, which is very, very bizarre because usually people would be scared if they saw a face like that. Now, of course, and then on top of that, we also have the Duchess who says, what would be more fun than a wedding? So are they trying to tease that maybe Ruby accidentally gets married here or somebody gets married? I don't know. I just thought it was very interesting. She says a wedding, like someone's going to get married in this story. Interesting. Very, very interesting indeed. But yeah, let me know in the comment section what you make of that. What do you reckon? Who do you reckon's the wedding's going to be related to? Could it be related to Ruby Sunday? Could it be related to one of the characters in the room? Who could this wedding be related to? I don't know. Something tells me something interesting is going to happen in that moment when the wedding happens, like some sort of plans being put in place as soon as they form this wedding, which I think is going to be like a trap of some sorts that's going to, where these whatever these weird looking aliens are going to be, I sort of forming a plan around the wedding, which is interesting. So nevertheless, I'm very intrigued about next week's story, especially with the fact that we might have the return of Captain Jack, along with all these weird butterfly type creatures that seem to be poisoning the 1813 England, which is very interesting. That seems to be a common thread here. So we'll see how this story plays out next week. I'm sure that next week's story is going to have some sort of tie to the final two episodes. But considering considering Ruby's mom is meant to be present in next week's story, so surely there's got to be some form of connection to the finale of this series if they're going to have Ruby's mom in this story next week. So there has to be some sort of scene that relates to the finale of season 1. I'm pretty sure we're going to get that scene next week. But anyway, that's pretty much my thoughts on the Dots and Bubbles. Leave me yours in the comment section below, and let me know what you think of Linda, this guest star character who has betrayed the Doctor in a big way in this story and how you feel about that whole betrayal arc that has happened in this story. I'll see you all in my next Who Universe video. See you then.